It all comes back to the DNA. The firms that know who they are will know who to be. You can learn a lot about an investment firm by listening to what they say. Alco's Mainstream's AGM Originals, The DNA, Capturing Culture, is dedicated to capturing the DNA of a firm by listening to what they say. The first season of The DNA stars EQT, a global investment firm started in Stockholm in 1994 that has over 270 billion euros in AUM. I sat down for conversations with 9 EQT executives in Stockholm this summer at their annual investor meeting. Each executive came from different parts of the firm and different parts of the world. Each had fascinating backgrounds and stories about how they ended up in private markets and working to build EQT. But there was a single through line threaded throughout all the discussions: the consistency and frequency that each executive talked about the firm's mission, vision, culture, and values. Episode 1 of Season 1, The DNA, stars Conni Jonsson, founder and chairperson of EQT. Conni, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, no, thank you for having me here in Stockholm. I think it's a fascinating setting to discuss so much of what you've built at EQT, how you've built a global investment firm, but really rooted in Nordic heritage and part of the Wallenberg family heritage as well. I'd love for you to start with your background. How did you end up getting into private equity?
I grew up on a farm. I was the youngest boy of 4 in this family, a very classical farming family. I was on that farm every day until I was 16 years old, every day. And I was in an airplane for the first time when I was like 18 or 19 years old. So I sort of have a very sort of strange and different background. And then I accidentally ended up working for the Wallenbergs. It was a tricky journey for me in the beginning because I tried to be as smart and as informed and as good looking like everybody else. And after a while I gave up and said, if I'm going to make this, why don't I try to be myself?
How did you be yourself?
Well, try not to be somebody else, to be honest to myself, be honest to my values, my background, where I came from, how I was different. Because I think it was clear after a while that it was a plus to be different. When you're young and when you're immature, you think that's a negative to be different, because you all would like to look like everybody else. But in my case, I figured out that to make it into success for myself, I needed to be different, because I would never be able to be as good as the others are on what they were. So that was sort of why that happened.
So if we take that concept, you were at Investor AB, and then you decided to start EQT in partnership with the Wallenberg family. How did you think about making EQT the concept of be yourself?
Well, a bit the same kind of approach, because EQT was started in 94, and I lived in the US 89 when KKR bought Ardian Nabisco, Bear at the Gate, you had Drexel Burnham and the leverage financing, all things was sort of vibrant then and there. But then I came back to Europe, and I felt that the way that this old classical holding company model worked, it was a bit obsolete. They were not sort of efficient, they were not sort of doing the things as good as they could do things for a number of good reasons, historical reasons, legacy reasons. And then I thought that this model that KKR and the other guys developed in the US, can't you adopt that bit to become more in line with how you are as a responsible owner of companies and run companies in a more firm and clear and focused manner than the old models, but being less financial than the versions you had in the US.
How do you balance that tension between being a responsible owner, but also generating financial outcomes, both for the business and ultimately for the end investors, the LPs?
I think it's a couple of different key components to succeed on that. Number one, you need to have a longer perspective. And you need to really care for the impact of your own doings, both in companies and around companies, and care for the consequences for the people engaged or involved. And that means that you need to be caring for the communities in which they operate and for the different stakeholders in those communities. And if you get that right, you can turn that into something positive, a positive force instead of something that is seen by more classical financial investors as a problem, that you have unions around, how do you avoid the unions? How do you sort of use only the financial toolbox to maximize the short and medium term return? You need to force yourself to think differently on why you are there. And that is sort of what laid the foundation for how we set up EQT, basically.
Talking about laying the foundation, the Wallenberg family, tremendous heritage in the Nordics and Europe, maybe not as well known to some in the US.
Mm-hmm.
How did the heritage of the Wallenberg family I think been in existence for 150 years or so before, inform how you think about this concept of long-term thinking?
Well, it's so different. It all depends on the audience you have. If I'm in Asia, everybody knows who the Wallenbergs are. When I'm in Europe, everybody knows. And of course in the Nordics. In the US, not that known, because for historical reasons, families hasn't sort of been able to keep on to assets that long. So that tradition isn't there. But in Asia, it's everywhere. And in Europe, it's clear. So their way of doing things has been seen as a role model and a success in geographies where those kinds of approaches have been sort of the prevailing ones. In the US, the Anglo-Saxon model is very more financial. And I would say not only the US, but the Anglo-Saxon model. So the Wallenbergs have been able to find a way to operate as a family group for 5 generations by taking this long-term approach to things.
How do you think about transmitting that set of cultural values to the firm at EQT? And you've brought in other firms, BPEA, Exeter, so you've acquired other businesses. How do you think about creating that long-term view on investing and business building?
Yeah, I think that in the end, you will benefit from having a long-term view when you build businesses, even if you don't own them forever. Because everything you do in a company that have a long-term objective sits with the company and pays off over time. So, we had this issue in the beginning when Peter Wallenberg said, who was my basically mentor, he's now no longer with us. He said, but now how can it be long-term when you just have companies for like between 5 and 10 years? And I'm struggling with that as a concept for a while until we really developed a model and a way of thinking that it doesn't really matter if we own companies 1 year or 10 years or 50 years. The decisions that we're taking now has to be based on a long-term view. How
do you think about operationalizing that, both in terms of how you actually underwrite, but then also how you incentivize your team to do that?
Yeah, well, it comes back to the values. How should we think about sort of what we're here to do? And how can we do it? Well, because we can buy and sell and trade and leverage up and give the keys to the bank. We can do all those kinds of things. But that has sort of 2 consequences. Number 1, we will be like everybody else. And, like I said, by upbringing, I thought there was a benefit of being different. And then that was also very much in line with how the Wallenbergs had done it. But they are struggling to sell companies because they don't like to cut off to a company, and that's emotional for them to a large extent. But I said, we are here to create good return for our investors, so we need to be able to get that element into the long-term approach of owning and developing companies. So when you really think through about sort of the difference in us owning a company or being an asset manager, buying and selling papers, and everything there in between, we took a very firm view that we are distinct owners of companies. And with distinct owners of companies, we take the responsibility of an owner. And to be able to succeed in creating good investment return with that kind of approach, you need to consider the long-term consequences of everything you do. So then you automatically become a long-term decision maker. And since we are buying companies, and we are working very actively on them, and then we are selling them.
I don't see many firms in private markets so clearly state purpose, mission, vision. Mm-hmm. You have that front and center on your slides, on your website. How intentional was it to do something like that, and what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, it means a couple of things. Number 1, it means that everybody that we're working with, or everybody that we are trying to hire, or everybody that we try to buy a company from, they know what they have to expect and what they will expect from us. So it creates a predictability. And with predictability comes also security or certainty. And since we are seeing ourselves as a business partner to everybody we do business with, predictability and certainty is very important. And the other thing, it creates a very strong culture of people knowing what they can expect working with us or for us or working at EQT. And that is a great filter to find the right people to work with for us. Because if people have a different philosophy on how things should be done, they wouldn't like to be working with us. So instead of us reviewing people when we hire them, the system in itself is basically the filter in us getting to hire the right ones. Hopefully the best ones, but the right ones is probably even more important for us.
So you talk about the importance of culture in building businesses. The business of alternative asset management, I want to unpack that a little bit because as you've been in the industry itself has grown and businesses have evolved.
Yep.
How have you thought about the evolution of your own business at EQT?
We have tried different things. We tried to become a credit investor, and we were pretty okay at it. We also tried to do a turnaround fund, and we were okay at it, but it wasn't really us. A credit fund, they basically lend the money to companies, and they have no way to then impact the company. And in turnarounds, you buy rather poor assets that hasn't performed, and then you're going to try to make it a bit better. We said that we are best on buying great companies in great industries, of course paying good prices for it because the transaction market is reasonably efficient. But that's okay as long as we know what to do with the companies and as long as we have the toolbox and the people to make it happen. So the turnaround fund, we felt it wasn't actually us, it wasn't our DNA. And the credit fund, to lend money and then just sit there and watch how the company was performing, that wasn't us. So it became very, very clear to us that where we actually can make a difference, where we can create really good return is by being a distinct owner of companies.
So I think that's a really interesting point to unpack because if you think about the industry, many firms are evolving and changing and they're adding different strategies. Those strategies may be distinct and have separate cultures within their own firm's complex, but they're all under one firm. How do you think about contrasting that with, as a firm, deciding to stay with this single-threaded view of who you are? Why do you think that's important when it comes to the investment culture that you have and have created?
Well, they will need to make up their mind of what they actually are all about. The big firms that we are competing with and we look up to, they are good and they are smart, but they are more and more becoming asset managers. In 2, 3, 4 years, you will not be able to tell the difference between BlackRock and Blackstone. When BlackRock eventually, when they were spun off from Blackstone, they were completely different firms. Today they're becoming the same. KKR, Apollo, TPG, and they're doing it great, but that's not us. And one difference might also be that they have a huge home market. We don't. We cannot rely on the Swedish market of savers to build a global business. And for us to be successful and the best informed owners of companies the way we would like to be, we need to have a global approach to things. So it's a prerequisite for us to be in business.
You started in Stockholm, Nordic Heritage, big presence in Europe. I think on the private equity side, around 50% of your companies are in Europe. You have a large portion in the U.S. as well. I think it's 30 or so percent in the U.S. So it's not that you aren't in some of these other markets. Asia, you have a big presence with the acquisition of BPEA. How do you think about helping LPs understand why it's important for them to think about partnering with a global investment firm?
You mean institutional LPs then, I guess?
Both institutional and wealth. I think wealth is the new institutional LP in a sense.
Well, I think we need to be smart in how we sort of address them and how we reach them. I think the fact that we are reasonably concise in what we're doing or focused on what would help, but I would say it's probably more difficult for people to sit and compare and contrast and make up their mind. Should I go with Blackstone, BlackRock, TPG, or KKR? Carlyle is still around, because they are pretty much more alike and they are much more complicated because they do so many different things. So I think we have a great benefit in being very focused on what we're doing. What we need is time and patience. And we're here forever, so we are in no rush. I also said that we had an interview with Bloomberg in London a few weeks ago, and I said that we should not be in rush to get too fast to the retail savers. Because
Why?
it's no, you need to be able to educate them of what they are doing. Just to flush them with things and then something happens is negative for us and for our industry.
So on that point, it takes real investment to work with the wealth channel, right? Like firms like Blackstone have 600 people focused on the wealth channel. 250 billion out of $1 trillion is in the wealth channel. Same with many of your peers. You've invested in the wealth channel heavily as well. It's a long game for sure, but do you think that there's a window of time where certain firms will win in the wealth channel and you have to be part of that window and kind of get yourself through? Otherwise, it'll be kind of decided whether it comes to being on the private bank platforms, having enough size and scale to do so?
Yeah, I think that's more of a philosophical question, I would say. We can, of course, rush to get there, but then live with the risk, not only of what we are doing, but what the industry is doing. Because we will always be sort of compared with these big American guys, even if we are different. And then I rather sort of take it a bit easy, make clear that people understand what we are doing, how we have structured our products, what the risks is in it for them. And we need to get them to fully understand that we are not here to make a quick buck, and we're not here to sell out or to do bad things. We're here to build a long-term business. And that patience we must have. Because I cannot as a chair sit here and see us taking risks in a way that we will be doing if we push things out too fast to uninformed customers.
What in your mind is the biggest risk with individual investors, the wealth channel, even potentially 401ks, retirement accounts, starting to adopt private markets as something that they invest into?
That they over-allocate to illiquid.
What do you think is the solution to that?
Information. Because we will never be able to make the decision for them. But we need to tell them how it will look so they can make informed decisions. And there, of course, intermediation, like we have discussed, the US is pretty advanced on, would help, hopefully. But it's not clear because, when the shit hits the fan, they always look at us. So it's not only us that can delegate that to the intermediaries. We also need to take our part of that in educating the market in general.
You're a global firm. I think certainly for U.S. investors, you look at massive indexation, concentration, correlation in public markets. A lot of that's come from the Mag 7. Many of those companies are U.S. companies. U.S. equity markets are kind of priced to perfection. Mm-hmm. And you're a European heritage firm. How should they be thinking about getting exposure to other parts of the world, whether it's Europe, Asia?
I think I shouldn't tell them what they should do with their savings, but they should be aware of what options they have. You could say from a theoretical perspective, diversification is good. And diversification is not only put it into EFTs or index funds. Diversification also deals with geopolitical risks, macro risks. And I would say, the US has been a great market for the last 5 years for very good reasons. Europe has been lagging. Now everybody says they're going to leave the US and invest in Europe. That might be right. But, it's a bet you take if you're not keeping the diversification. And I also been extraordinarily concerned about the fact that people have been underinvesting in Asia. Because Asia, that's the biggest population, the biggest geography population in the world. And they have a nice underlying growth, undoubtedly complicated, immature, but it's the underlying economic benefit of what you are seeing there outweighs Europe and US with multiples. So that kind of diversification we should present and offer the different participants in the marketplace. And then it's up to them to choose.
I'd love for you to unpack what you said about Asia. Your colleague, Jean, has called it a structural alpha opportunity. What exactly do you all mean by that?
The societies are in a different sort of phase of development than the mature geographies that we are basically looking upon every day. And, the things that we have benefited from the last 50 years, they will benefit from the coming 50 years. Just as a law of nature, when you have a growth in population, And when you have a growth in sort of in wealth and in prosperity, and the social systems are developed and the financial markets is maturing, that all is value drivers for the economy in general. So I think, without doing a lot, you should be able to get better return in Asia the coming 50 years.
How do you think about investing in today's world if we are becoming more deglobalized? Yes, let's hope that the world becomes as you say it does, but how do you think about investing?
If I put myself in a position of sort of somebody that is caring for for his family and for her family and the long-term prosperity of this security that a solid financial base gave, I would like to have a global approach to that kind of thinking. Because you can get a crazy leader somewhere, and then sort of that is turning against the positive development for a completely unlogical reason. But that is nothing that you can foresee, but you can expect it. You should do things where it's best to do things, and then you should trade with the others and make sure that it was beneficial for everybody. I think that I have the belief that I grew up on a farm, and the nature doesn't need us, but we need the nature. And the nature always finds its way. The water always finds its way. And I would say that having been working in the global financial investment industry for like 40 years, the same thing works there. It might take longer, but in the end, logic prevails there as well. So I'm of the belief that if you are well thought through, well informed, and if you have a diversified approach, to be participating in all the different parts of the global economy, I think is more predictable and would be more beneficial long term.
In your mind, what's the biggest risk investing in today's world?
Politics.
How do you mitigate that risk?
You can only diversify away from it.
How do you think about the skill sets that are going to be required in private markets? What would you tell younger people who are thinking about getting into the industry, or younger analyst associates at EQT, what skills to work on to be successful investors going forward?
Yeah, I would say that most of the things that we have been working on the last 20 years will potentially become automated. So, spreadsheet tigers, forget that, it has the value that they bring is very... I think there's two things that will be critical for success in the private equity market. Number one is to be able to attract the best people in running the companies.
How do you do that?
By creating a governance structure and a culture where the right people likes to be associated. By honesty, transparency, fairness, respect.
A lot of those things that you talk about are core to EQT's culture and value set, as you mentioned. I want to unpack a few of the sayings that you have, because I think those are very instructive sayings and they mean a lot.
Yeah.
So I'll share a saying, you share your perspectives. More than capital.
We need to bring more than money. We need to bring knowledge on how to run the companies.
Locals with locals.
We need to understand what happens on the ground. We cannot sit in New York and fly in and make a deal in Germany and hope it goes well. We need to understand the people, we need to understand the circumstances, we need to understand the logic of the locals.
Values-based partnership.
Yeah, most partnerships, the way you described the industry earlier, was based on making money. And making money is important because what we're here to do is to create return for our investors. We sell return, so we must make money. But the glue cannot be money making. The glue must be that we like to do what we're doing and that we like to do good things. I think that good business is great business.
Unpack that a little bit more, because I think sometimes people decouple doing good from generating good returns.
It's completely aligned in my book. Completely aligned.
How does the industry and how do investors start to understand that more and more?
By us explaining how we think about it. It took us for the first 10 years, we saw all these things around sustainability and future-proof as a cost. And then we started to analyze, okay, what have we actually done with the companies to create the good return? And it was clear that one of the major factors to that was that we created companies that was perceived being in a better shape when we sold them than how they looked when we bought them. We call it multiple expansion. And then we said, okay, maybe we should use another word. We said, okay, strategic repositioning. But basically what it was that we had invested in the right factors of the company to secure a good future for them by investing in those soft things. And that made us get a better multiple when we sold it, equal better return. So it all comes together in this notion of doing good is good. And I also think that from a value perspective, I like to be associated with things that is positive. I don't like to be seen as a vulture or a company's stripper, or I like really to be associated with building good businesses.
I want to make sure we touch on something else that you do. Goes together with it, your love of music.
Yeah.
You're involved in the music industry, so let's tie it to private markets. What song would you use to describe the current state of private markets?
I have, of course, to say The Winner Takes It All.
What does the winner takes it all look like to you in private markets going forward?
If you think about the private market in the way we think about it as owners, I hope that we represent what is the winning recipe in terms of long-term approach, focus on return, be good to people, be fair, be transparent, be open. It's not a sort of strange way of doing things. It's a very straightforward way of doing things.
I think this was a fascinating dive into all the different angles of how you think about the business you've built. Congratulations on the business that you've built.
Thank you.
Over the years, and how much thought you've put into how you've built the business.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you for listening to this episode of DNA, Capturing Culture. You can stream all the episodes on your YouTube channel at altgoesmainstream AGM, or read about the episode at my Substack at altgoesmainstream.substack.com. And of course, special thank you to EQT, the executives that shared their stories and perspectives. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.